Emily's restless ambition and early life. From the earliest days of her childhood in the tree-lined suburbs of Seattle, Emily Parker felt an untamable spark in her soul. She was the only child of two fiercely accomplished parents. Her father, a renowned appellate judge, revered throughout the Pacific Northwest, and her mother, an influential partner in one of the city's top investment firms. Her family gatherings could have passed for miniature summits, a crowded room of professionals who spoke in quick, measured tones about cases, profits, and educational accolades. Surrounded by a legacy stitched together by law degrees and Wall Street appointments, Emily learned early on that expectations weren't merely spoken. They were woven into the fabric of every dinner conversation and family portrait. Yet, amidst the pride and tradition, she found herself irresistibly drawn to the world of music. At 5, she begged for an old piano from a yard sale. By 7, she could play Chopin by ear. While her parents beamed at her recitals, they always gently reminded her that music was a lovely hobby, but not a career. As she grew, so did her craving for something more than legacy. She desired expression, adventure, and the freedom to chart a course defined by passion rather than protocol. Emily spent late nights sneaking out to the city's underground jazz bars, where she'd watch local legends bend melodies to their will and soak up every ripple of applause. She'd lose herself for hours in composing piano pieces that told stories she'd never dare speak aloud at home. But every hope was shadowed by the silent pressure pressing down on her shoulders. Her father's law books filled their study, leaving barely any room for her sheet music. Her mother would gently nudge her toward summer internships and mock trial teams, hoping to plant the seeds of another Parker success story. The looming portraits of Parker ancestors seemed to watch her with anticipation, a silent reminder that her family's future had already been outlined long before she was born. Yet Emily never stopped dreaming. She knew deep down that her restless ambition wasn't a flaw. It was the only honest part of herself she had. And in the quietest moments, she vowed that one day she would transform the music swelling inside her heart into the life she was meant to live. Pressure and reluctant sacrifice. Turning 18 marked an unexpected crossroads in Emily Parker's life, one that felt more like standing at a cliff's edge than a milestone to celebrate. As high school faded into memory, she faced pressure from every direction. Her grandmother, the formidable matriarch of the Parker family, became the voice of tradition, calling weekly from her stately Victorian home in Boston to remind Emily that the Parker legacy was more than a name. It was a duty. Emily's dreams of taking a gap year to tour with a jazz band or moving to Nashville to chase a music career were quickly dismissed as daydreams. College applications in hand, her family rallied around her, but never bothered to ask what she really wanted. Her father arranged meetings with partners at prestigious law firms during school breaks, and her mother's calendar filled with coffee dates, set up to introduce Emily to local judges and potential mentors. The weight of their ambition made every breath heavy. Emily watched her friends plan hiking trips or take up odd jobs, while she sat in crowded conference rooms, attempting polite small talk between legal lectures and mock trials. At every family dinner, conversations turned inevitably to law school rankings or scholarship news. Every compliment carried a hidden demand, every smile a silent expectation. To keep the peace and avoid disappointing those she loved, Emily suppressed her longing for music and reluctantly enrolled in the most competitive pre-law program in New York. Nights once filled with piano improvisations turned into cramming sessions. The jazz bars she loved were replaced by the library's fluorescent lights. She played the role her family needed: diligent, composed, willing to make sacrifices for the greater good. At times, the loneliness was overwhelming. She watched her reflection in the rain-soaked windows of the city, an accomplished student on the outside, but haunted by the melody of a life she hadn't chosen. And yet, Emily convinced herself that the sacrifice was temporary, a price to pay for love, pride, and belonging. Still, the restlessness lingered beneath the surface, waiting for the moment she could reclaim the music inside her heart. The exploitation by her beloved cousin. For most of her life, Emily Caldwell believed loyalty was the singular thread holding her complicated family tapestry together. No thread, perhaps, was as tangled or as dear to her as the one leading to her cousin. And, for much of her childhood, her best friend, Harper Davis. Harper, 3 years older and just as bright as she was beautiful, was the kind of person who commanded attention the moment she stepped into a room. The Davis Caldwell family, tightly knit by their long-standing Boston roots and generations of success in the legal world, adored Harper. She was the Harvard prodigy, the rising star at Olson & Brown, and a young woman whose every accomplishment was celebrated with parties, holiday toasts, and whispered comparisons. Compared to Harper's composed poise and storied internships, Emily had always felt like an unfinished sketch, full of raw potential, but lacking that effortless sophistication. Growing up, Harper would sweep into Emily's room in the Caldwell mansion, their late-night talks stretching on the window seat that overlooked the city. At first, their bond felt sacred. Harper shared secrets and insecurities no one else could touch. She confessed the pressure of being the firstborn and admitted her own private longing for freedom, a longing Emily understood too well. Those conversations became lifelines. Emily believed she had found, in her cousin, a rare kindred spirit. But as time wove them through high school and college, small fractures appeared. At family reunions, Harper would paint Emily as the creative one, while subtly claiming credit for Emily's unique musical ideas. Emily composed this piece last week, but I helped her brainstorm the bridge. It's our song, Harper would say, smiling at a circle of relatives who nodded appreciatively. Emily, always sensitive to criticism and wary of confrontation, let the comments slide. The true turning point came the summer before Emily's sophomore year at Columbia. Harper, home on break from her demanding position at Olson & Brown, seemed more anxious than usual. One afternoon, she called Emily in a panic. "I need help. There's this case research I've been assigned. My deadline's tomorrow morning, and I honestly don't know how I'll finish." Emily, excited to prove herself useful to someone as accomplished as Harper, agreed to help. They spent a marathon night poring over legal texts and old case files. Harper heaped praise on Emily for her thoroughness and unique perspective. When Harper's supervisor complimented the report the following week, Harper's thanks stopped short of mentioning Emily at all. This pattern quickly became a routine. Whenever Harper faced a tough project or tight deadline, she'd turn to Emily under the guise of cousinly collaboration. She sent rough outlines to Emily's inbox late at night, secretly relying on her cousin's meticulous nature to catch inconsistencies, patch up arguments, and run last-minute research. "You're so much better with Supreme Court history than I am," Harper would insist cheerfully. "You read between the lines, just like Uncle Rob." Sometimes, the requests bordered on personal favors. Once, Harper even pressed Emily to help write a presentation for the firm's summer intern program, saying, I'll owe you a nice dinner next time I'm in New York. For a long while, Emily rationalized it all away.
This links him to the
Family
warehouse.
helps family, she told
How does
herself.
the senator fit
Harper
in?
had always looked out for her, after all. But with each favor, Emily felt her own dreams receding further. The piano in her cramped apartment collected more dust. Weekends that should have been devoted to music workshops or open mic nights were swallowed up by footnotes and case citations. The sacrifice of her time felt increasingly heavy, especially when Harper rarely even acknowledged her help once the crisis had passed. The exploitation wasn't confined to late-night emails or research sessions. Harper's manipulation extended into the family's sphere of influence. At gatherings, she would recount stories of stressful deadlines, always painting herself as the unflappable workhorse. When a particularly thorny brief landed her a department-wide shout-out, she told everyone it was all thanks to her secret weapon, a phrase that always made Emily's heart sink, because she knew she was being referenced but never named. Things escalated the winter. Harper was up for a major promotion, junior partner at the firm. The role was fiercely competitive, and Harper's nerves frayed around the edges. She started leaning on Emily to construct detailed client memos, compile deposition summaries, and even ghostwrite sections of her application essay for the internal review committee. No one else can make my logic sound clean and persuasive like you, Harper insisted, with a mixture of wheedling and flattery that only increased Emily's unease. One snowy night in late February, exhausted and nearly in tears, after hours rewriting a brief for Harper's use, Emily finally voiced her discomfort. "This doesn't feel right. I want to help, but it feels like you're asking too much now." Harper, for once, allowed her calm facade to slip. "You think I have a choice," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what this means for our family. If I don't get this promotion, Dad will never recover from the embarrassment. Don't let us down, Em." Suddenly, the family bond felt less like a warm embrace and more like a chokehold. Harper dangled guilt and obligation like weapons, making Emily feel complicit in a web of silent expectations. Outside the family, no one suspected a thing. Harper maintained her image of effortless competency, and Emily remained the helpful, invisible hand behind the scenes. Sometimes, Emily would watch her cousin accept accolades and laugh with colleagues, her own heart filled with a brackish mix of love, resentment, and shame. She started to realize that the connection she had once treasured was built on uneven ground, a foundation of mutual need, but also quiet exploitation. Privately, Emily began documenting each request, saved drafts, emails, and annotated case files, careful to preserve proof of her years in Harper's shadow. It wasn't spite that motivated her, but a growing sense of self-preservation. With every late-night favor, she inched closer to understanding the cost of her silence and the depth of Harper's reliance on her. It was a slow-breaking heartbreak, the kind that made Emily question not just her cousin's integrity, but her own place in the family, and the price she might have to pay for ever stepping out of the shadows. She didn't recognize herself in the mirror anymore, a woman who had smothered her own ambition to fuel someone else's ascent. But she wasn't ready to confront Harper yet, not until she knew what the final cost would be and whether she had the strength to reclaim both her name and her narrative. Heartbreaking discovery and painful silence. Life has a way of unmasking even the gentlest betrayals. And for Emily, the revelation fell like a hammer on glass. It all began one gray November afternoon as she wandered the corridors of her aunt's home after Thanksgiving dinner. Laughter echoed from the kitchen, but Emily lingered near her cousin Olivia's office, feeling adrift after another day spent editing Olivia's work instead of reconnecting with old friends. She paused outside the slightly ajar door, drawn in by Olivia's vibrant, hurried voice. Inside, Olivia spoke animatedly with a partner from her firm, outlining how she'd leveraged family resources for professional gain. Emily, she's talented, yes, but also easily guided. Olivia laughed, the words landing as a sharp sting in Emily's heart. Olivia continued, spinning the tale of her accomplishments, never once clarifying where her efforts ended and Emily's began. It was the first time Emily fully understood. Her cousin's praise was a mask, her gratitude a facade, and her loyalty a tool to achieve another's ambitions. Emily's vision blurred with betrayal, but she remained rooted in place, listening as years of collaboration crumbled into exploitation. She heard plans, strategies that used Emily's intellect as invisible scaffolding for Olivia's campaign for senior partner. And as the truth settled in, blanketing Emily in cold realization, she felt the gravity of silence. Speaking out would fracture family peace and spark scandal. Saying nothing would mean letting her worth continue to be siphoned away. After the guests departed and the winter wind pressed against the window panes, Emily internalized her heartbreak. She carried her pain into the hush of her apartment, tracing the piano's keys absent-mindedly as the weight of secrets grew heavier. The music, a refuge in hardship, now echoed loneliness and loss. Olivia's words haunted her as she sifted through old emails, drafts, and text threads, each one confirming her worst fears. Her own generosity had built walls around her future, and her silence had granted Olivia the power to continue. But Emily was no longer naive. She began to quietly gather evidence, saving files, composing journal entries, compiling a record of every contribution and conversation that marked her involvement. It wasn't revenge that drove her. It was the awakening of self-respect, long buried by obligation. She realized that her absence, her muting, had become part of Olivia's strategy. Day after day, Emily weighed the cost of disclosure against the toll of continued invisibility, until the lines blurred between love, loyalty, and justice. Emotions swirled, shame, anger, resolve, forming the storm that would eventually push her to reclaim her narrative. Her heartbreak fueled her determination. Emily listened, observed, and waited. She clung to the silence, not as a sign of weakness, but as the careful pause before a necessary storm. One that would not only unveil Olivia's deception to their family and firm, but would, for the first time, grant Emily control over her own story. The plan to turn the tables in the year, beginning of March, after months of quietly collecting evidence, Emily found herself swinging on the edge of decision, the kind that could either unravel or finally free her. Each interaction with Harper weighed more than the last, and the burden of truth grew almost unmanageable. Isolation, which once seemed suffocating, transformed into fertile ground for courage. She could no longer allow her gifts, her voice, and her youth to be currency exchanged for her cousin's career. Emily's plan didn't come to her in a single, lightning strike moment. It emerged painstakingly, pieced together over sleepless nights and anxious subway rides, born from the reality that silence would leave her invisible forever. She realized two simple and profound truths. What was being done to her was both unethical and deeply personal, and unless she spoke out, the cycle would only continue. She'd remain a footnote in someone else's story, her ambitions extinguished by obligation. It was time to take back the narrative, reclaiming not just her credit, but her dignity. The first step was organization. With the focus of someone orchestrating a court case, Emily arranged the digital and physical evidence she'd gathered. Her bedroom became a mosaic of timelines, annotated emails, color-coded folders, and a spreadsheet that would impress even her detail-obsessed father. She double-checked each citation, ensuring no ambiguity and anticipating every question that could arise. What started as an act of survival soon felt like an act of defiance, an assertion that her effort mattered, that her name belonged on every draft and behind every idea. Next came research. Emily dove into the HR policies of Olson & Brown, state labor laws, and stories about workplace credit theft. She reached out anonymously to an advocacy group that supported young professionals, learning the safest ways to disclose sensitive information and protect her rights. She didn't want to destroy Harper or bring down the firm. She simply wanted truth and fairness. Yet Emily knew the gravity of her actions. The family would bristle, the firm might recoil, and Harper would surely eat back. Still, she pressed on. She drafted a carefully worded letter addressed to the law firm's partner review board, meticulously presenting the facts. The document trails, the instances of ghostwriting, the patterns of exploitation, and the emotional toll. She included backup files, clear timelines, and her own signed statement attesting to the circumstances. It was honest, unvarnished, and raw, deploying her own vulnerability as a tool for change, rather than a weakness to be hidden. But the challenge wasn't only about building a case. Emily also had to steel herself for the social fallout. She practiced telling her story out loud, sometimes alone in the shower, sometimes in front of the mirror at 2 a.m. She visualized worst-case scenarios, her relatives' stunned faces, Harper's accusations, her parents' disappointment, and braced herself for them all. Would her family understand? Could they ever forgive her for breaking the code of silence? As the weeks passed, the opportunity to act presented itself. The annual Olson & Brown Partnership Review meeting was scheduled for late April, coinciding with one of the firm's most significant cases. Harper was the star candidate, the heir apparent, and their family was already buzzing about the impending celebration. If Emily waited until after the big announcement, the damage would be far greater and harder to repair. If she spoke up now, she could minimize collateral harm and possibly preserve some scrap of their bond. She chose her moment with care. The day before the meeting, Emily hand-delivered the evidence packet and letter to the board's confidential HR counsel, marking it private and urgent. Her hands trembled, her mouth dry, but her resolve remained solid. For the first time, she felt a rush of clarity, like stepping out of the shadows and into the center of the story she'd lived for too long on the periphery. The aftermath was both a whirlwind and a standstill. The partners moved swiftly and quietly, initiating a formal review. Harper was called in for questioning, caught wholly off guard. Wordless glances, intense silences filled the family group chat. Emily's phone erupted with calls from her parents, her aunt, and, after days of silence, finally, Harper herself. That call was the hardest. Harper's voice was strained, accusatory, but threaded with betrayal. "You could have just talked to me. You didn't have to do this, Em." But there was no remorse, just disbelief at being challenged. Emily listened, sadness colliding with unexpected calm. "I did talk to you, Harper. For years. You just never listened." Harper hung up. Emily sat quietly in her apartment, the city lights winking at her through the window. She felt the ache of loss, but also the clean sharpness of self-respect. News soon spread through the firm, subtle but seismic. Instead of Harper's promotion, there was a quiet reshuffling, a public but professional statement about internal process updates and commitment to ethical workplace standards. Rumors flew, but no names were made public. Privately, Harper had to step down from her candidacy and was reassigned to a different department, her ambitions quietly curbed. For the first time, the Parker and Davis families were forced to confront the uncomfortable truths that had long lingered beneath their accomplished exteriors. Emily didn't gloat. She knew the losses were real. Her relationship with Harper, the trust of some relatives, the illusion that family would always come before ambition. But in the soft quiet of her new mornings, she also knew she had finally done right by herself. Her plan had never been about revenge. It was about setting the record straight, reclaiming her autonomy, and making her voice impossible to erase again. Facing reality and embracing change. There are moments in life when reality hits with an intensity that leaves no room for denial, when old illusions shatter, and we are forced, perhaps for the first time, to look at our lives with undistracted honesty. For Emily, this moment arrived in the aftermath of her decision to expose Harper's exploitation and set the record straight. The shockwaves of her bravery reverberated not only through her own heart, but through the tightly knit fabric of her family, in the revered halls of Olson and Brown. In the days that followed, the Caldwell and Davis households were gripped by a heavy hush. Family dinners, once orchestrated with laughter and gentle teasing, now carried an unspoken charge. Her parents, both titans in their own right, struggled to process the revelations about Harper and her manipulative abuse of Emily's trust. If there had ever been a time when appearances mattered more than the underlying reality, it was now, and the family's sense of identity was cracking under the weight of everything unsaid. Emily herself was thrown into a storm of mixed emotions. On one hand, there was the undeniable sting of loss, the loss of the cousin she once idolized, of the unity she believed their family possessed, and of the innocence that had allowed her to be used for so many years. On the other hand, a quiet, stubborn pride began sprouting in her chest. She had finally spoken up for herself, refusing to let her talents be overshadowed or her contributions erased. This was uncharted territory, and it felt equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. The first few weeks were marked by awkward encounters and tense silences. Her mother oscillated between disbelief and support, sometimes hugging Emily tightly without words, other times questioning whether things couldn't have been resolved quietly within the family. Her father became quieter, spending long hours at work and even longer ones restlessly pacing their backyard, as if searching for the wisdom he dispensed so easily in courtrooms, but seemed to misplace at home. Friends and colleagues reacted in 100 different ways. Some reached out with encouragement, quiet messages acknowledging Emily's courage and validating her pain. Others withdrew, unsure how to interact with someone who had upended a celebrated family tradition of unity and discretion. Even at Olson and Brown, whispers circulated. A few co-workers privately thanked her for speaking truth to power, while others looked at her with wary suspicion, as if her presence alone might unravel their own carefully guarded secrets. It was one afternoon in late spring when the changes became impossible to ignore. Emily had been called to a follow-up with the firm's HR department. They wanted to hear, in her own words, the full scope of her involvement, not just the instances of ghostwriting and research, but the emotional toll and psychological strain that years of manipulation had caused. As she recounted her experiences in detail, Emily realized there was a kind of dignity in telling the truth, even in pain, There existed a space for her voice to matter. The HR team listened intently, their questions respectful, and their demeanor more compassionate than she had expected. Returning home that evening, Emily faced the echoing emptiness of her apartment. With Harper now ostracized from any immediate promotions and the family deep in crisis, loneliness settled around Emily. Yet, unlike the earlier years, she found in herself a capacity to sit with that loneliness, to understand it as the cost of standing up for her beliefs. For the first time, she began to see herself not only through the lens of what she had lost, but also by what she had gained: autonomy, clarity, and the faint but growing hope of a life lived by her own rules. Family meetings became inevitable. At each gathering, the conversations circled around Emily's actions, at first with anger, then with sadness, and finally with a brittle acceptance. Her grandmother, usually the strongest proponent of family loyalty, surprised everyone by quietly sitting beside Emily one afternoon. "Do not let their disappointment turn into your regret, sweetheart," she murmured, squeezing Emily's hand. "You did what none of us had the courage to do. Don't apologize for that." Those words opened a small wellspring of solidarity. Over the following months, a few more relatives found the courage to approach Emily personally, some admitting their own battles with unreasonable expectations. A few even confessing their relief that someone had finally broken the cycle. The family, for all its pride and tradition, was forced to re-examine what kind of legacy they were truly building, and whether accomplishment was worth the cost of silence, secrecy, and exploitation. The process of embracing change wasn't smooth, nor was it quick. Old habits persisted. Many dinners still ended with awkward silences. A few relatives avoided Emily's gaze, and the family group chat was noticeably quieter. Yet something fundamental had shifted. Discussions began to branch away from case law, prestigious colleges, and investment portfolios to include stories of disappointment, struggle, and even failure. For the first time, it became acceptable for family members to talk about their challenges. Through everything, Emily anchored herself in music. Evenings found her returning to the battered piano in her apartment, letting her fingers trace new melodies that expressed her confusion, grief, and surprising moments of peace. Sometimes she played for hours, improvising pieces that told of loss and discovery, weaving hope into every dissonant chord. These private performances became her therapy, a way to process grief and rebuild her sense of self beyond her family's expectations. She also began seeking out new communities. Emily volunteered at a local arts center, teaching music to neighborhood kids whose dreams had never bumped up against generational traditions. She found comfort in their joy and raw creativity, their willingness to try, fail, and try again. In turn, her students looked up to Emily for her patience, her stories, and her gentle insistence that mistakes were not failures, but tools for learning. The music room became a safe space, one where both teacher and student could discard old labels and simply be themselves. Professional growth took a new shape as well. Without Harper siphoning her time and energy, Emily's focus shifted. She joined local jazz ensembles and collaborated on musical arrangements that she'd never allowed herself to finish before, submitting one to a regional competition on a friend's dare. When her composition was selected as a finalist, Emily was stunned and then overwhelmed by gratitude. It was a small victory, but one that signaled a profound transformation, a visible reward for the courage it had taken to step out of the shadows. Change continued to ripple outward. Olson and Brown instituted workshops on workplace ethics, inviting guest speakers to address credit theft, workplace bullying, and burnout. To Emily's amazement, a few employees confided in her during these sessions, sharing stories of recognition delayed, of invisible effort, and of the pain caused by a lack of acknowledgement. A subtle cultural shift began inside the firm, and, though many resisted, the momentum proved difficult to stop. Emily's bravery provided a blueprint for others. You could survive the confrontation and come out with your character and career intact. Yet, the journey of acceptance and reconstruction was not without setbacks. There were moments when isolation gnawed at Emily, when doubts threatened her newfound autonomy, and fragments of guilt floated through her mind. She sometimes wondered if she had irrevocably damaged her bond with Harper, or if peace with her parents would ever fully return. At low points, Emily found herself longing for the warmth of old traditions, even flawed ones, questioning whether speaking the truth had truly been worth the cost. But every time regret beckoned, Emily would return to her music and to the people whose lives she was now shaping. Slowly, she built new friendships and fresh familial bonds, sometimes from unexpected places. Her father eventually invited her to dinner, apologizing for his earlier distance and telling her how much he admired her strength. Her mother began to ask about Emily's latest compositions and, even more meaningful than any spoken apology, offered to attend her students' end-of-semester recital. The change Emily witnessed in herself was mirrored by the transformation within her family. The Parker and Davis clans, once so quick to judge and slow to listen, began reevaluating long-held beliefs. Some sought family counseling, others reflected individually on why ambition had too often overshadowed kindness. Gradually, empathy replaced the rigid pride that had for years stifled honest connection. For Emily, forgiveness became a journey, not a destination. She no longer imagined a magical day where every wound would close, or where family celebrations would again be effortless and free of tension. What mattered more than perfection was the willingness to keep trying, to nurture small cracks of light in the legacy of silence. As she taught her students, she learned for herself that growth and reconciliation could coexist with heartache, and that staying true to one's values didn't require the erasure of past pain. In ways both large and small, Emily embraced change by taking ownership of her own story. She drew boundaries and honored her limits, insisting, gently but firmly, that no accomplishment was worth losing herself. She started a blog detailing her experiences with family expectations, credit theft, and the courageous acts of self-advocacy. Her words resonated with readers across the country, many of whom thanked her for illuminating a struggle that was so often hidden. Step by step, the pieces of her life began to fit together in new and surprising ways. Emily wasn't defined by her family's ambitions or her cousin's deceit. She was free to set her own course, to take risks, to make mistakes, and to begin again. Her relationships with her parents, with new friends, and even with Harper remained complicated, but were now anchored in hard-won honesty and mutual respect. As the seasons changed, so did Emily. She discovered that facing reality wasn't a single act, but an ongoing process, a daily recommitment to clarity, integrity, and hope. She spent afternoons working on new piano pieces in sunlit rooms, her music no longer an escape, but a kind of celebration. She poured herself into her teaching and writing, building a mosaic of small, meaningful moments that, piece by piece, shaped a new kind of legacy. And when the next family gathering finally arrived, an autumn reunion in a city park, Emily smiled at the faces around her. They were flawed, wounded, but also capable of change. She understood at last that the courage to speak and the grace to forgive could exist side by side. In reclaiming her own voice, she had helped her family find theirs, and together they were learning, slowly but surely, to embrace the honest, imperfect beauty of what it meant to change. A new beginning for Emily. When the dust settled, Emily found herself standing at the intersection of endings and beginnings, a crossroads that held both uncertainty and thrilling freedom. For the first time since childhood, she looked out at the world with a sense of possibility untethered from the old piano-shaped shadows of obligation and heartbreak. Yesterday's wounds had not disappeared. They lingered as reminders of what she had endured. But stepping forward, Emily discovered that healing was not about erasing the past, but about building something meaningful upon the ground she had reclaimed. She started by reclaiming her mornings. Instead of waking up to anxious text messages from her cousin or unread emails bloated with someone else's deadlines, Emily's phone stayed silent beside her new journal. Early sunlight fell through the window, illuminating pages filled with music fragments, private reflections, and memories that had once been too painful to write down. Each entry was raw but honest, a blueprint for rebuilding both self-trust and hope. Though she had often feared that standing up for herself would leave her alone, Emily quickly learned that solitude and loneliness were not the same thing. Her apartment, once a cramped hideaway from familial chaos, slowly transformed into a place of creation. She moved her battered upright piano to the center of the living room. She bought herself fresh flowers every week. She allowed music to spill through the walls at any hour she liked, improvising jazz chords or working out heart-tugging compositions late into the night. Emily realized that music was both her lifeline and her rebellion. Free from old obligations, she returned to the city's vibrant music community. It started with hesitant steps, a visit to an open mic, a casual jam session at a local jazz bar. Nervous at first, Emily soon found herself drawn into circles of creative souls, fellow artists, songwriters, teachers, and dreamers. Where her family had set boundaries on what was possible, her new friends only asked what she wanted to explore next. She began teaching piano at a community arts center, drawn to the idea of helping others find their voices. Her students ranged from giggling first graders to determined retirees, each carrying dreams that had yet to be shaped or discouraged by the world. Emily poured her patience and encouragement into every lesson. She discovered the profound satisfaction of guiding trembling fingers through their first melodies, watching shy smiles blossom as their confidence grew. She saw pieces of her younger self in their hopeful eyes, and it motivated her to nurture not just technical skill, but a resilient sense of self-worth. Word of Emily's coaching spread. She was invited to join workshops and youth music camps across the city. On weekends, she volunteered at organizations supporting teens struggling with expectations, musical or otherwise. These environments felt like a kind of homecoming, a place where honesty was valued and creative risk was celebrated. Emily's approach was unconventional. She asked students to improvise stories in sound, to write journal entries about how music made them feel, to disregard the notion that perfection was the only path to respect. Outside of teaching, Emily worked diligently to revive her own compositions. The years of living behind the scenes had bred both technical expertise and emotional subtlety, an ability to translate her journey into music that was soft, yet unbreakable. She spent long afternoons writing, revising, and debating with herself over notes and lyrics. At times, the process was brutal, forcing her to confront sadness and anger she'd tried to set aside. But there were also moments of joy, when a melody finally came together, or when she performed a new song and saw it resonate with someone in the audience. Those exchanges, however small, felt like quiet triumphs. Eventually, Emily recorded a demo, a collection of piano-driven pieces she called Shadows and Sunlight. She released the tracks independently, not caring if they reached a wide audience or not. To her surprise, the music began to circulate online, shared by students, friends, and even strangers who felt seen by her vulnerability. Local radio stations played a few tracks, invitations to perform at city events, and coffeehouse festivals started to arrive. For the first time, Emily's voice, her real, unfiltered voice, was finding its way into the world, separate from anyone else's ambition or shadow. As her life grew richer, with fresh connections and creative milestones, Emily also began to heal bonds with her family, albeit slowly and on her own terms. Her parents, once bewildered by her choices, started to see the happiness and security she had cultivated through music. They visited her classroom, beamed as her students performed, and, most importantly, offered words of unconditional support rather than lists of expectations. Though the hurt of past years could not suddenly be erased, Emily learned that relationships could be rebuilt on honesty, step by tentative step. Forgiveness took time, especially when it came to Harper. In the aftermath of the scandal, Harper withdrew from the family's inner circles, struggling with her own disappointment and sense of loss. For months, they barely spoke, a silence that was heavy but necessary. Eventually, Harper sent Emily a letter, handwritten and unguarded, apologizing for all the ways she'd leaned too hard, taken too much, and let pride silence empathy. The pain between them wouldn't vanish overnight, Emily knew, but that apology cracked the door open again. They met, nervously, in a quiet cafe, where they talked openly for the first time in years. Both sisters, by blood and by choice, understood now how family could wound as well as heal, and neither wanted to repeat the mistakes of the past. Beyond her old family and her musical rebirth, Emily discovered deeper truths about belonging and purpose. Free from comparison, she allowed herself to craft new traditions, hosting small dinners with musician friends, writing birthday songs for her students, hiking alone in borrowed moments of peace.
That's great, honestly.
She learned to enjoy silence as much as applause, solitude as much as company. That gentle self-acceptance was, perhaps, her most hard-won gift.
Hi, Olivia.
The realization that her worth had never hinged upon being flawless or useful to someone else.
Cheers.
She continued to journal. Some entries became the seeds for essays and articles, and with gentle encouragement from a former professor, Emily started submitting her writing to arts magazines and websites. Readers responded deeply to her story of quiet resistance and artistic survival.
This photo is
She was
definitely
invited to
evidence.
speak at conferences
Good thing
about
I'm the only
creative
witness who
courage,
saw it.
family dynamics,
paranoid.
and the price of authenticity. There, she met others who had broken from damaging legacies, some through music, others through different art forms or acts of bravery. Each conversation reinforced the idea that the truest stories come not in spite of struggle, but because of it. Seasons changed, and so did Emily. The events that had once defined her, sacrifice, betrayal, heartbreak, became only chapters in a much larger narrative. Her dreams no longer felt distant or far-fetched. They were simply points along a living, evolving path. There were setbacks, of course, gigs that fell through, moments of self-doubt, and days when grief gnawed quietly at her resilience. But through every slip and stumble, Emily recognized that the act of starting again was its own quiet victory. By her next birthday, friends and family gathered in her sunlit apartment for an impromptu recital. Her oldest students played, a few colleagues sang, and Emily closed the evening with a new piece, a joy-filled improvisation dedicated to second chances. Laughter filled the space, and for a few precious hours, every wound felt like it had been, if not healed, then at least honored and set aside. Emily looked around at the assembled faces, old scars and new hopes together under one roof. In that moment, she understood that her new beginning was not about reaching a single dazzling climax, but about learning to celebrate small, everyday triumphs, an encouraging word, a finished song, a shared meal, a hand held in forgiveness. When autumn's chill returned, Emily joined a local jazz ensemble, her original works now a regular feature of their performances. She took genuine delight in collaboration, arranging harmonies and sharing solos, knowing that every member's contribution was recognized. The music they created was layered with memory and meaning, stitched together by resilience. Sometimes, between rehearsals, the group would gather for late-night coffee, swapping stories about setbacks and comebacks. Emily felt a kinship with these fellow travelers, all of them intent on building joy from hardship. Over time, she heard from strangers who had been moved by her music or her writing. Some were young people wrestling with impossible standards. Others were adults piecing together lives after betrayal. Emily replied to every letter. Her responses were honest, gentle, and bracingly hopeful. Her story, she told them, was not one of easy resolution, but of gradual growth and persistent faith in the worth of starting again. Even when the path was uncertain and the heart still sore. With each passing season, Emily let herself dream even bigger. She pitched a citywide arts project uniting musicians and writers across neighborhoods, an annual festival designed to cultivate collaboration rather than competition. The proposal was ambitious, but the city council and local businesses rallied behind it. The inaugural event, held in a leafy downtown park, drew hundreds. Emily opened the festival with a simple, heartfelt speech about resilience and renewal. As the sun set over swirling notes of jazz and poetry, she sat on the edge of the stage, astonished by how far she had traveled from the girl whose voice was once only an echo behind someone else's achievements. One quiet afternoon, seated at her piano, Emily glanced at her old journals, filled with years of searching and sorrow. She realized that her greatest triumph wasn't any performance or accolade, but the hard-won ability to live out loud, unafraid to assert her existence and her dreams. Mistakes and heartbreak had shaped her, but they no longer defined her. Each morning began with gratitude. Each evening ended with music. If she had a message for others, still tangled in webs of expectation or loss, it would be this: there is always a way forward, however winding. Begin again and again, letting hope be the melody that carries you toward a life of your own making.